Hair. Director, please begin.
Thank you, Chairman Washut. Chairman Landman, Chairman Washut, all members of this committee. Good morning. My name is Frosty Williams. I'm the Director for the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. With me is Allison Moore. Allison is the Deputy Director over our CGIS unit. Allison will be giving you folks a presentation and an update on where we're at with NIBRS reporting. And I'm going to provide a presentation and an overview of our ICAC unit. The gentleman that was going to do this ICAC presentation is actually the current supervisor of our ICAC unit. However, over the weekend, he had a situation come up and he was not able to be here today. So you're stuck with me. I'm not going to get way down in the weeds on the technology side of ICAC. Just simply because, quite honestly, it would be way too in-depth. What I handed out was the actual report that we submit on a semi-annual basis. It's the report that we've submitted for the last 3 years. You'll see on the first page, it starts with January 1st of 2020 through June 30th of 2020. The several pages into it, it then completes the year 2020. And what this are the most notable cases that we work. I think if you guys take the time to read through it, whether now or during my presentation, it'll probably generate some questions, and it will certainly give you an overview of essentially what these cases are about. And my apologies on this. This does not have the actual sentences, because at the time that they're submitted, many of these cases have not come to adjudication. But in my presentation, I'll give you an overview of the type of sentences we see both in state and federal court. So to start with a brief history of Wyoming ICAC, it started back in late 2000, early 2001. And at that time, federal money became available through a grant called the ICAC grant, which was pushed out by the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, most commonly known as OJJDP. Congress had decided that law enforcement throughout the nation needed assistance and funding to essentially investigate people who are absolutely predators, and they prey upon children via the internet. So Wyoming DCI applied for the grant, received it. We initially started that unit with, I believe at the time it was only 3 agents. The state statute that ICAC here in Wyoming heavily depends upon is Wyoming Statute 64303, which is the sexual exploitation of children and the associated penalties that go along with it. These initial 3 or 4 agents that initially stood up our ICAC unit had to attend various trainings. To get started in ICAC, it takes almost 2 to 3 years to become proficient in how to do these types of investigations. And a lot of that has to do with the forensic analysis behind the scenes, where they have to learn how to extract, identify, and preserve digital evidence. And as you guys can understand, technology in this area advances at a crazy rate. So law enforcement is somewhat always behind the 8 ball and trying to stay up with that technology. I think here in Wyoming, we did it very well. We actually received national and international recognition because the initial people that stood up the Wyoming ICAC were nothing short of being gifted with technologies, with computer technology and understanding it. At the onset, these agents actually wrote software and the coding behind that software to help identify people that prey upon children by sharing child pornography on the internet. The software that we initially created played a huge role in being able to quickly identify those images as they're being transmitted via the internet. And that software was shared nationwide and internationally. Probably a year and a half to 2 years into the inception of ICAC units across the country, ICAC on a national level realized that they needed a better database essentially to collect statistical data. And again, the agents from Wyoming DCI were key in writing the code, creating the software, and it became known as, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, my apologies. But this software that they created not only was used, it started here in Wyoming, and then we pushed it out nationwide. And today, Activity Manager is the name of the program that was created. This Activity Manager program is still being used today, not only by Wyoming ICAC, but many ICACs across the country. I believe there's a gentleman here with us today. Oh, my apologies, he's not here. There was a gentleman that possibly was going to attend that was kind of one of the pioneers in this. His name's Robert Leesenby. He retired several years ago. It's probably a good thing he's not here because he would be upset if I introduced him and pointed him out. But I thought he was going to be here. You know, one of the downside of technology advancing as quickly as it does, I mentioned law enforcement is behind the 8 ball on it. And the other thing, due to the advancement of technology, that where we're at today compared to even 3 years ago, are what are known as cyber tips. Prior to really 2019, cyber tips were really not that common. Cyber tips are pushed out by what's known as NCMEC. NCMEC is the National Center for Missing and Endangered Children. It was created by Congress when they saw a need for essentially to have a clearinghouse nationwide that would handle information involving missing and exploited children. NCMEC is a wonderful organization. I can tell you we rely very heavily on NCMEC. But the reality is, as social media platforms such as Meta or Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, and there's numerous social media platforms. As technology advances, these social media platforms have improved their methods of identifying concerning information that is being pushed out. Their algorithms have advanced to the point where if they see anything that is related possibly to child pornography or the exploitation of children, these social media platforms report that data to NCMEC. NCMEC is essentially just a clearinghouse. They take that data, and based off of either the suspect or the potential suspect or potential victim that is identified in this information, based off of IP addresses, if they are captured, and that's a big if early on in this process, they then push that data out to the respective ICAC unit within that has jurisdiction in that geographical area. In 2019, we only received just a handful of cyber tips. In 2020, Wyoming, I apologize, let me figure out where I'm at in my notes. In 2020, NCMEC as a whole sent out 21 million cyber tips to ICAC units across the country. And there's only 61 ICAC units in the United States. those 61 ICAC units are staffed with approximately 4,500 federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. So in 2020, they sent out approximately 21 million. In 2021, that jumped to 29.3 million. So out of that total amount, again, in 2019, Wyoming only received a handful of tips. In 2020, we got 520 tips. In 2021, we received 579 tips. And in 2022, we received 792 tips, okay? So our Wyoming ICAC unit is composed of one agent who is a supervisor, a total of 6 other agents, one forensic examiner, and then due to the partnerships we've been able to establish with our federal law enforcement partners, we also have one forensic examiner from Homeland Security, one part-time FBI agent, and one part-time Homeland Security agent. So if you break that down, in 2022, we received 792 cyber tips. That's an average of approximately 66 tips per month that we have to follow up on. So some of the changes that we have.
Director, just one quick question, just to clarify. These HSI agents assigned to ICAC, they're federal agents, not state Homeland Security, correct?
Great point, Chairman. Yes, you're correct. They are federal, not Wyoming Homeland Security. So some of the changes that we've been able to make in the last several years to better leverage our resources, and we wanted to expand Wyoming's ICAC footprint. Initially, our ICAC unit was stationed here in Cheyenne, and they would have to respond all over the state. And obviously, as we all know, Wyoming is a fairly large state. So what we did within the last several years is we pushed them out in the field. So currently, the supervising agent and 2 other agents, along with the one forensic examiner, is located here in Cheyenne. Also here in Cheyenne is where the one part-time FBI agent is also located. In addition, we have 2 agents who work out of our Casper office that are solely dedicated to working the ICAC type investigations. Also in Casper is where we have the one federal Homeland Security forensic examiner. And then we have 2 DCI agents located in our office in Rock Springs. So this is just a total of only 7 DCI agents that are assigned to work ICAC cases. When these cyber tips come in, we absolutely do our best to review each and every cyber tip. We prioritize them based off of the severity of the information that's known at that time. There's times where the tip is so detailed, it's clearly a hands-on type violator, or it's somebody that we strongly suspect is involved in the actual production of child pornography, which would make them hands-on. Some of the cyber tips are relatively vague. It might be a young female where it's difficult to determine if they're under the age of 18, that might be sharing nude photos with multiple people. We do our best to follow up on those and identify the IP address and actually make contact with these people. So the handout I gave you are certainly cases that are most significant on a monthly basis that we deal with. The other thing that the ICAC grant allows us to do, and we've taken advantage of this, is the ICAC grant that we receive from the federal government allows us to purchase various types of computer equipment and put other law enforcement personnel from various agencies through training, and they become what is known in the ICAC world as ICAC affiliates. And we have worked very hard to push this out to local agencies. We currently have 10 ICAC affiliate agencies in Wyoming that we work with. I have a list of those agencies, and just for your information, those agencies are the Buffalo Police Department, the Casper Police Department, Cheyenne Police Department, Johnson County Sheriff's Office, Lander Police Department, Natrona County SO, Riverton Police Department, Sweetwater County SO, Teton County SO, and Uena County SO. And due to the number of cyber tips we receive, we rely heavily on these affiliate agencies to help us follow up and investigate them. The reality is, in law enforcement, it's very hard to find people who want to do these types of investigations. Number one of the most concerning issues we deal with on a daily basis is the type of material that investigators are exposed to. It's the worst of the worst is the best way I can explain it. I mean, I've been in this profession for 35 years, and I'd like to say I've seen it all. When it comes to this type of material, it truly shocks your soul, is the reality. So burnout is something that is very, we take very serious. We offer a lot of different employee assistance programs to help these investigators that are exposed to this on a daily basis. And to put it in perspective, when they seize a computer or some type of smart device and they download and extract all of the images that may be captured in that, we're not talking, you know, a dozen or 100 files. We're talking at times tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of photos. So can you imagine sitting in front of your computer all day long and reviewing 150,000 images at a minimum? You know, technology helps us to do that in a quick means, but still you're sitting there looking at it. And the other really concerning issue is the fact that we are seeing more production here in Wyoming. We absolutely are. Now, some of that is due to advances in technology that we utilize, which helps us identify production easier. But when you're looking at videos that are produced by these perpetrators and they are doing the worst of the worst to young children. I mean, recently we had a case where the victims were under the age of 2 years old. They were actually removing diapers off of these infants to get their sexual gratification. So when you're watching this type of videos day after day for 8 to 10 hours a day, it's very taxing. So I go back to why it's hard in law enforcement to find people, to find law enforcement officers that actually have the computer capabilities. I mean, I'm not a person who's wired to understand technology. I'm more of the pen and paper type of guy. But ever since the inception of ICAC, I've had the privilege of being involved in the supervision over ICAC. And I can tell you it takes special types of people that, number one, can understand the technology, use the technology, and apply it to extract the digital evidence that's needed. As I mentioned earlier, it takes about 2.5 years to train people. This training is also very expensive. The software that we utilize on an annual basis cost us about $128,000 a year just to keep current with the advances in technology. And unfortunately, the other thing our ICAC units are tasked with is because in Wyoming, and it's not just Wyoming, it's everywhere, law enforcement as a whole is honestly behind the eight ball when it comes to having the training and the knowledge and the equipment necessary to extract digital evidence from smart devices. And we see a tremendous increase. Literally every crime we investigate today, whether not just ICAC crimes, but almost every crime we investigate today, some sort of smart device is involved in the commission of the crime or the sharing of the fact that the defendant or defendants did the crime or how they planned the crime. It might be text messages between them. And we are oftentimes, our ICAC unit is oftentimes asked to assist other law enforcement agencies to download that data out of various smart devices. Now, in Wyoming, our larger agencies, such as Casper Police Department, Cheyenne Police Department, your larger sheriff's offices are getting caught up to speed with the proper equipment and the training. But your more rural law enforcement agencies, we're often called to assist them. Another thing that I think is one of the most critical functions that our ICAC unit provides is training to the public. I mean, it's obvious that across this nation, law enforcement cannot arrest every single person that is involved in these types of ICAC crimes. So ICAC units across the country spend a great deal of time educating parents, youth, school teachers, school counselors, and different community organizations. And in 2022, our ICAC unit provided exactly 60 presentations. And to the best of our ability to capture stats, we know a minimum of 2,800 people attended those 60 presentations. And in those presentations, we educate the youth. We used to gear it towards junior high and high school age students, but due to what we've seen in the last several years, younger and younger people are now having access to cell phones, other types of tablets, devices, and they're accessing the internet. We have lowered it down to 5th and 6th graders, where we're educating them on simple steps that they can take to try to protect themselves and not share information and how to block people. With the parents, we educate them on numerous apps that are available that can be utilized to help lock down their children's phones, for lack of better words, and also parental apps that can be used to monitor who their children are talking to. Another thing that we did, and I think this was within the last 2 years, I think Byron Odekoven could speak on this as well. We partnered with the Wyoming Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, because what we see is many of these offenders are repeat offenders. Many of these people are registered sex offenders. And what we have done, we utilized a different federal grant that DCI has access to, and we purchased an app called Offender Watch. And we pushed that out through the sheriff's departments where parents can have access to that. And essentially what it does, and it's not a perfect app by no means, but essentially what it does is it provides parents with the ability to be alerted if their children are communicating or texting or emailing with a known sex offender. Again, as long as that sex offender is using the cell phone that they provided as their contact information, et cetera. But it's better than nothing, obviously. So in 2022, our ICAC units executed a total of 194 search warrants and arrested approximately 40 people on various charges related to the sexual exploitation of children. In addition to that, over the course of the last 3 years, we have rescued 23 children. And that is something we are extremely proud of. And that is literally children here in Wyoming that were being victimized, and the images that were taken of that victimization were being spread across the nation and the world. Overall, we are very happy with the majority of the sentences we see in state and federal court, especially when you compare it to other types of crimes. We recently had a younger agent at DCI who is a rock star. He is gifted. And he actually wanted to move away from working drug cases, and he wanted to go to work ICAC cases. And we were thrilled that he wanted to do that. And the reason he wanted to do that is he saw that the sentences that people that commit these types of crimes receive are substantially higher, and it motivated him to say, I want to be a part of that. And the gentleman has done an awesome job for us. Approximately 70% of all of our ICAC cases end up being prosecuted in federal court for various reasons. Some of those reasons involve that at the onset when ICAC was started, not only is the investigation of these types of crimes more specialized, also the prosecution is. And as we all know, there's turnover at the state and county level, especially with prosecutors, whereas at the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's a little more stable for the most part. Now, we have seen a great increase in the number of state and local prosecutors that take on these cases. We see it in Representative Oakley's area. We see it in Sweetwater County, where, you know, the federal footprint, especially in that Rock Springs, Evanston area, there's a smaller federal prosecutor footprint in that part of the state than there is here in Cheyenne, Casper, and in Lander. The Lander U.S. Attorney's Office tries to more specialize, I think it's safe to say, in crimes only on the reservation. But because of that, we have seen an uptick in the number of ICAC cases that are prosecuted at the state level, which is awesome. For the most part, the sentences that these perpetrators get in federal court is substantially higher than what they can get in state court, especially if they're repeat offenders. And I apologize that I did not have the time to update this report to show what the sentences were on some of these. Some of them I do know and some of them I don't know. But I think it's safe to say that Wyoming ICAC is doing well. I think we have done an excellent job of leveraging our resources. As we move forward in the future, we are looking at putting in requests to increase our footprint even more. One of the biggest issues that need to be addressed in the future with ICAC is the need for more forensic examiners. What we currently have been doing since the inception is the investigators that actually do these cases also are trained in how to do the forensics. And across the nation, what we're seeing and what we want to do here in Wyoming is the number of investigations that are coming in compared to the amount of time it takes to do the forensics is putting us behind the 8 ball. As I said, we only have one forensic examiner that's a full-time state employee. We have one federal Homeland Security federal examiner in our Casper office that helps us. And the model I think of is currently how our crime lab works. You know, we have agents out there every day doing drug investigations. The extent of how they confirm that a powder substance is a controlled substance is simply done with a field test kit. It's then sent to the crime lab where our chemistry unit actually does the chemical analysis to determine what type of controlled substance it is. And I'd like to mirror that with how we do ICAC cases, where we can train agents how to do these types of investigations as long as they're freed up where the forensics are actually being done by forensic examiners. And there's pros and cons to that theory, but I think it is the direction that we ultimately need to move towards. I think in doing that, we will have to get more forensic examiners so they can handle that load. And it's not only for ICAC cases, as I mentioned, one forensic examiner is swamped with simple download of cell phones. And as technology has advanced, that software makes it quicker and quicker. I mean, it's crazy how fast we could hook up somebody's cell phone and extract the majority of the data out of there. The other big challenge we face is encryption. And encryption is where it's honestly a double-edged sword. These large social media platforms, obviously they're in the business of selling their product to folks like all of us. We want our identifying information protected. Well, when it comes to protecting that identifying information, it also protects those people who use the internet to prey upon the innocent, the young. So it's truly kind of a double-edged sword. It's an issue that is being tackled at the federal level as well. Overall, most of these big companies like Google, et cetera, Microsoft, they work fairly well with law enforcement. The problem is it's not always timely. The problem we have with it is that there can be delays when you subpoena certain information. It gets tied up with the lawyers representing the companies, and it's just not timely. Certainly at times, depending on the exigency of the circumstances, we partner with FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and we are able to get the information rather quickly when extreme exigent circumstances do exist. So prior to moving to NIBRS, Chairman Washut, do you want to have questions now specific to ICAC?
Something tells me that we could probably tie up a couple hours with questions from this committee on this topic.
We definitely could.
Just quickly, I think most of us are familiar with the TV program that popularized these sting operations where predators were identified. Is your microphone on? Would you turn yours to red, giving us feedback? So how much of that type of proactive sting operation does your agency have the capacity to perform?
It's a great question, thank you. Back when we first started ICAC, literally up until about 3 years ago, we were very proactive, okay? We had the time to be very proactive. However, in the last 2 to 3 years, since we've seen this tremendous increase in cyber tips, unfortunately, we're not as proactive as we used to be. We're more reactive. Being proactive, we miss those days. You know, there were numerous cases that we have put together over the years where we would advertise undercover as a 38-year-old mother who had a 7-year-old daughter that she wanted to make money off of. And we were able to lure predators from multiple states away here to Wyoming. But unfortunately, the reality is today we're not as proactive as we wish we could be.
Other questions for the director? Mr. Co-Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director, thank you for this morning. Really appreciate it. I guess the question and the request, both at once, is to help us know that our statutory framework is where you need it to be. So the question is it? And then as we go forward, I hope that all of us can work with you guys to do whatever we can do here in the legislature.
Chairman Landon, thank you. So when it comes to Wyoming Statute 64303, Friday and Saturday, I talked to every one of our agents that are working these types of cases, and I solicited from them input on any changes that they saw that would be beneficial with this statute. And the statute in section C, little e, talks about people that are sentenced through a second or subsequent conviction pursuant to paragraphs little b, little I through little 4 of this section, where the penalty is 7 years and not more than 12 years. And all of the agents that I talked to would like to see that increased, where if you get convicted of a second or third or fourth penalty for literally the same thing, where it's raised from a minimum of 7 to 12 years. I mean, ask a law enforcement agency how much time somebody should get, and you'll get a number anywhere from 50 to 100 years. So I would leave that to you folks, but raising that, I think, would be beneficial. You know, we have seen some cases here in Wyoming that were prosecuted, and due to the person being convicted of multiple counts, we had a case recently in Sweetwater County where I believe the person got 75 to 100 years. We had a case in Campbell County where the person received 35 years. But that's definitely not the norm. And the reality is there were multiple victims. Is part of the reason why those sentences were so high. So I hope that answers your question.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a quick follow-up, and yes, it does, Director, thank you. I was looking down to our prosecutor while you were indicating that we might want to take a look at that, and we certainly will. This is an area of the world that the recidivism is very high, isn't it? I actually worked years ago on that front, on a program down at our state penitentiary. Pretty tough to pull somebody out of this kind of behavior, isn't it?
Chairman Landon, I would absolutely agree with you. I have never been involved in the treatment side, especially with these type of offenders. But based on the fact that what we see is many times the people that are involved are repeat or registered sex offenders, I would think the ability to rehabilitate would be very, very challenging.
Director, how much state money goes into the ICAC? Is it all funded with the federal grant, or is there any state funding?
So the amount of, probably the easiest way to answer that is let me share with you how much federal funding we get, and then I will briefly give you an overview of how much of what that federal grant covers. So there's 7 DCI agents that are solely dedicated to the ICAC mission, and 1 forensic examiner. That 1 forensic examiner and 1 of those DCI agents, their salaries are paid actually out of the ICAC grant. So the other 6 DCI agents, their total salary is generally funded. In between 2017, 2018, and 2019, the federal ICAT grant, we have to apply for it every year. And the average amount of money we received in those 3 years averaged $323,000 per year. Now, one thing that is concerning, and we don't know if this trend is going to continue, but in 2020, 2021, and 2022, the average amount of money we received in the ICAT grant was approximately $317,000 a year. We don't know yet the 2023 grant. I think that comes out, I think in July is normally when we apply for it. As I think I mentioned earlier, it costs us about $128,000 a year to stay current with technology and various computer programs, applications that we utilize. All of that money comes out of the ICAT grant. So to go back to your original question, Chairman Washut, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head of what it would cost, of what money is spent out of the state general fund per agent, but there's 6 agent positions. I think you could ballpark that at about, with salary and fringe and benefits, probably at about $150,000 to $160,000 a year would be the total cost. The vehicles that these agents use is paid for out of the state general fund. A lot of the overtime is paid for out of the state general fund. Some of it is taken out of the ICAT grant. Travel costs, again, we try to spend all the money out of the ICAT grant every year before we tap into the general funds. So I would have
I
to
think it
do
gets
more
some pretty
math.
good ideas.
Yeah.
Representative Oakley, did you have a question or a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Director, just to back to the statutory discussion. So possession is a 10-year, max 10-year, and the other one is in the distribution is min 5, max 12. I can tell you the min helps us a lot. There's not a lot of statutes that have a min, but I mean, then obviously that gives the direction for everyone, including judges, that it's a serious, obviously a serious offense and not to go below that. So so that helps us. I was just looking at this. One of the things that's a possibility is that in the distribution statute also is the manufacturer. So manufacture, generate, create, or distribute. We usually see the distribution, and then that gives us our min 5 to 12. But if you're manufacturing child pornography, I would think, of course, this doesn't, you could probably do several counts and hopefully get there for your high sentence. But clearly, in my mind, manufacturing is very significant. And so on those, maybe a way to, but maybe a higher than the max 12 on those. But anyway, for discussion, but it is one of the statutes that has a min 5, and that's helpful, I think, for prosecution.
Thank you. It's 8:17 on my clock, so I know we probably all have more questions that we could go into, but let's go ahead and grab the NIBRS update if we could.
Thank you, Chairman. So NIBRS is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. It's a system used to collect crime data from law enforcement agencies across the country. That information is then pushed into the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, or what they call UCR. That data is based on FBI definitions of the crimes, not based on the statutes for each state. And so the reason for that is so that crime data from each state can be compared across the country. That data is collected by the local law enforcement agency, who then pushes it to the state agency. In Wyoming's case, that's DCI. And then once we have all of the information, we then push it to the FBI. NIBRS is used to generate reliable statistics so that crime, law enforcement agencies, communities, researchers, and public policymakers are able to base their decisions on well-informed decisions about the crime and public safety. The FBI's UCR program started collecting statistics in 1930. Back then, they created a system called Summary Reporting System, or what we call Summary. Summary used a system of only 10 offenses that they collected information under, and they also used what's called a hierarchy for the crime reporting. So if one incident had multiple offenses within it, they only collected information on the most serious offense. So this didn't give a true, accurate picture of crime across the country. So in the 80s, NIBRS was created. This gave a more accurate and robust picture of crime because it collects information on every element of every offense within an incident. And when I say every element, that includes information on victims as well as the offenders that are committing the crimes and any relationship between those two. NIBRS collects information on 52 offenses versus those 10 offenses that Summary collected on. So in February of 2016, the FBI announced that it would be retiring the Summary system and forcing everyone that's reporting crime data to begin reporting through NIBRS so that they would have that more detailed information. That sunset deadline for Summary was January 1st, 2021. During that same year, DCI was awarded a federal grant that allowed us to purchase a new system that we use that accepts NIBRS data, because the previous system we had only accepted Summary data. At that time, DCI notified law enforcement agencies across the state about that January 1st, 2021 deadline. So how do we get the information from local law enforcement agencies? We get that two ways. One way is through record management systems, or what's called an RMS. For agencies that have a record management system, they input their incident information or their cases into their RMS, and then they're able to push that information from the RMS into our system that collects NIBRS. Not all agencies in Wyoming have RMS systems, especially our smaller agencies. So DCI purchased a program called Web Incident Editor that allows agencies to manually enter their crime data for NIBRS. The downside to that is that they have to enter every single detail manually for every aspect of every incident. It's very cumbersome and very time consuming. So we only recommend that to be used by agencies that have 20 or less incidents per month. In February of 2019, we saw our first agencies begin reporting in NIBRS in Wyoming. We had a pilot program. Those agencies were Park County Sheriff's Office, Cody Police Department, and the Powell Police Department. Through that process, we figured out a process to allow agencies to begin reporting in NIBRS data. In order to do that, the agencies have to have at least one person trained in NIBRS, as well as complete a certification plan, and then begin testing. And so that testing allows us to make sure that the information that they're submitting into NIBRS is accurate. Part of that accuracy has to do with when they enter their cases into their case management system. Oftentimes they're looking at Wyoming statutes or their municipal code, and then their RMS system, if that's what they're using, has to translate that into the NIBRS data. In 2018, or since 2018, we've trained 304 people 43 of those people that were trained in 2022. We've also conducted 6 trainings. And I say we, but really it's one person. We have one person at DCI who handles our uniform crime reporting for the entire state. So she conducted 6 trainings. Most of those were in Cheyenne, but she does hit the road and do training in other parts of the state to help some of these agencies who have one person who's able to report in NIBRS. What we see for the folks that are reporting in NIBRS in Wyoming, this is not their only job. I don't know of any law enforcement agency in Wyoming that has a person dedicated to the crime data collection. So oftentimes it's someone who's wearing a uniform who's out doing patrol or investigating cases, or it may be a records clerk who also doubles as a dispatcher. The agencies in Wyoming who are struggling to get on board with NIBRS are facing the same struggles that agencies across the nation are facing. Those struggles include lack of funding to either procure a record management system or to update their system. Record management systems, when they purchase that system, there's several different vendors out there. Then they have to pick which modules they're going to do, and then they also have to pay for upgrades. The other issue that a lot of agencies are seeing are staffing issues. High turnover rates. If they have one person that's trained in NIBRS, oftentimes we see they get somebody trained in NIBRS, they start their test plan, and then that person resigns, and now they're at a standstill with their NIBRS because they have to rehire, maybe get that person trained in multiple things such as dispatch, and then send them to DCI for training. In January 2023, the Department of Justice announced that nationwide law enforcement participation in submitting crime data had fell by 22%. As of January 18th, 2023, only 67% of law enforcement agencies nationwide were submitting NIBRS data. That's down from 93% in 2020. The reasons for that are the reasons that I kind of mentioned, the struggles with record management systems. Many of these vendors continue to work on their product and assisting agencies in pushing their NIBRS data. I do think that Wyoming continues to head in the right direction when it comes to NIBRS data. We talk often with our sheriffs and chiefs across the state about NIBRS. I think they all have an interest in continuing and moving forward with NIBRS. The problem is, again, with the vendor issues, our hope is to one day have 100% of agencies in Wyoming reporting.
We're about out of time. Can you tell us how many agencies in 2022 submitted data through NIBRS in Wyoming?
Chairman, so I don't have the total number of agencies who reported. I believe the last time we spoke, we were at around 40 to 50% of agencies in Wyoming were reporting. We're currently at closer to 75% of agencies in Wyoming who are reporting. I know we added at least 9 new agencies in 2022 that started reporting in NIBRS who were not previously reporting NIBRS data.
Thank you. Well, members, we had a hard break at 8:25, so we can get off to our committee meetings. I apologize for the little bit of time, but one of my hopes is that these types of briefings might get us thinking about interim study topics, and maybe we'll get more in depth at a later time. Please, on behalf of the Joint Committee, share our appreciation to all your people. We really recognize the dedication and the many challenges that come in dealing with all of these issues, especially the ICAC arena, and boy, hats off to all your people. Thank you for what they do. Mr. Chairman?
Just a big thank you for this morning. Very informative. We look forward to working with both of you as we go forward, and I share the chairman's wish that you would thank all your people for what they do.